epic fantasy on Zoom Into Books today with Katherine Graham. Katherine is a fantasy author, developmental editor, and top-10 Reedsy Reviewer. Her debut epic fantasy novel, The Vow That Twisted Fate, is a 5-star indie reader-approved novel and recently won a Next Generation Indie Book Award. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Katherine.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's so good to be here. Thank you, Kathy, for hosting. Really looking forward to it.
We're so happy to have you. And if the viewers on Facebook have any questions for Katherine, please type them in the comments section. We'll make sure she gets them. And I think we'll start off, Katherine, with you telling us a little bit about yourself and the inspiration for your wonderful book.
Thank you. So again, thank you for being here. My name is Katherine. I write under Katherine D. Graham, and I'm the author of The Vow That Twisted Fate, which is this book here. It is my debut fantasy novel. I wrote a couple books way back in college that I put out unedited, not knowing anything about the editing process, and those of course flopped. And wouldn't you know, I'd end up by the end of college becoming an editor and just helping other people developmentally editing their books. So for the last 10 years, I've been helping people beta read professionally and developmental edit their books. And now I work for an editing company, and they've been great. The Vow That Twisted Fate is a epic fantasy, which means it's like good versus evil. But it's about a young woman who's in a completely pure and innocent world, and a portal to an evil dimension opens up in the sky. And it turns out that a villain that they thought long dead, who is sealed away into an evil dimension with everything evil in their world by the main character's ancestor, has come back. And she's going to invade this world. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, the inspiration for the book came from a dream I had during National Novel Writing Month back in 2016. I was about 4 days into my nano novel, and I just wasn't really feeling it. And I went to sleep one night with writing on the brain, and I dreamed a scene that would be the middle of this book, where she goes into the evil dimension to close the gateway and protect her home. And when I woke up, I had to know what happened. So much about her and this dwarf that she called forward in time to help her, and their vow and how that changed fate, and did it change fate, that I ended up writing it for NaNoWriMo that year. And so that's how the story was born.
That's amazing. Now, I really do think it's the first time a novel has been born from a dream that I've heard about personally. That's fascinating. I think you're lucky that you remembered enough of it you could finish it.
You know, maybe it's just from being up so late that night with all those writers, and we were out at an IHOP, which in the US is like a 24-hour pancake place. And we were all just together at IHOP writing our books, and I was just struggling. I didn't get past a page. So maybe it was the coffee / the pancakes / the writing environment. I don't know.
Oh, that's great. So you have a wide range of characters in your book. And I know as an editor, you're very cognizant of character development. So tell us about your characters and how they were, how you came up with each one. Are they based on people you know, or is it pure fantasy?
This one I can honestly say is pure fantasy. I think there's a running joke in the writing community, you know, you never want to write off of somebody, and that's why we say it's always coincidental. But this one I can honestly say there was nobody I knew that really matched any of these characters. And maybe it's again because it came to me in that dream, but the main character, Arlena, is a young queen who's lived her whole life in a world where evil doesn't exist. So she's a little naive in the beginning. She's a little carefree. She's queen of her people by tradition. But there's not really been a need for leaders in a world without evil. So the events of this story, evil falling from the sky into her world and bringing with it these evil creatures that they have to defend themselves from, sort of forces her into a position where she almost has to grow up, even though she's a young woman in her like 19, 20-year-old range. She has to grow up, and she realizes a good bit about herself through the story, and learns how to be selfless, and learns the values that her ancestor had when her ancestor sacrificed herself to save their world 500 years before. And being a fantasy and a huge Tolkien fan, I wanted to have dwarves and I wanted to have elves, but I wanted dwarves to be like the key characters besides the main queen. So the secondary main character is the dwarven king, who had made a vow to Arlena's ancestor. Arlena is the main character. He had made a vow to Arlena's ancestor that he would come anytime someone in her bloodline needed help defeating this specific enemy. And so Arlena calls him forward in time to help defeat this villain. And when he gets there, he's just not enthused at all with Arlena, because she's not battle hardened like her ancestor, but she looks identical to her ancestor. So there's a huge debate through the story. Is she her reincarnation? Is she something else? Do they just happen to look alike? And that's a twist for the readers to find out, I guess. But I really do, like you said, as an editor, I love delving into what makes the different characters who they are and seeing the characters grow in different ways. So readers of epic fantasy who like elves and dwarves and centaurs and fauns, and Jen will love this book because there's a little bit of everything in here.
That's wonderful. And so I assume that your favorite authors are Tolkien authors like that. Who do you read?
So for traditional authors, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, of course, were key parts of my founding years as a reader. But as I got older, I ran across a fantasy author named Amelia Atwater Rhodes, who was the first really woman writer that I read, who was also young, like late teens when she put her first books out. And she sort of empowered me to know that I could write. So I've read most of her books, and then I've met indie authors. And I've gotten swept up into the world of indie authors. And I've just been so enamored with Luke Courtney, who wrote From the Ashes, and he wrote a book called Argent Blade. Argent Blade's very dark fantasy, and From the Ashes is like an epic dark fantasy. But his world building was so rich, especially for an indie author. And then I got into the court intrigue side of this book that you'll see with Her and Other Races. A lot from Katrina Lewis, who wrote Heavy is the Head, which is a newer release. But I read as many books as I can get my hands on for fun. But because I'm an editor, because I'm a writer, I probably only read 1 or 2 books for fun a week. So I just read when I can. It's like I live and breathe books.
I can understand that. I read manuscripts day in, day out. So I get my recreational reading when I drive, when I travel through audiobooks. And it's nice that we have audiobooks, and I know your book is available on Kindle and paperback, and you can get these on Amazon and other online bookstores. So how long have you been an editor? Tell us about that. Tell us, how did you get started being an editor?
Well, I think subconsciously, the path to being an editor was sort of drilled into me by watching my mom as an editor when I was a little girl. She would spread the manuscripts out from the publisher on the floor with red pens. And I'm one of 9 kids. So with 9 of us running around screaming and carrying on, she would be editing away. And we'd all know, don't touch mom's paper and don't touch mom's pens, you know. And I would think, man, I could never do that. And then in high school, friends started asking me to read their book and give them opinions on books, which is beta reading. For those who are watching who are readers and maybe don't know as much about the writing side, we don't usually, as writers, like to just give you our first draft. We got to get feedback first. So I would do some beta reading in high school for friends and point out plot holes and point out character questions. But I didn't actually train on it until college. I went to the University of Memphis in Tennessee. And while I was there, I started out as an English major. And I took a technical editing course, which was way more boring than the fantasy fiction course that I took. I also took a fiction course. And I learned how to do beta reading as a professional through there. I learned how to do developmental editing as a part of that course. And then the technical editing course, as boring as it was to try to learn technical editing, to no fault of the instructor, if she's watching this, it's just a lot of content. I had learned all about typos and Oxford commas and all of that stuff and all the different manuals of style. And honestly, when I left University of Memphis, aside from helping some friends at the university edit some of their papers and grade papers, for a while I took a little bit of a break and just edited as a freelancer for friends. And it wasn't until this past year that I came on to a company to do this as my full-time job. It's always just been like a passion, hobby, side freelancing job on Fiverr. And the more I've worked with clients and the more books have gotten signed and gotten published, the more it made me want to put my own book out in the world. This year, at the beginning of the year, 6 of the authors I helped last year got signed by traditional publishers, and they signed 8 books. And I was so excited for them because I love seeing the worlds that they create come to life. And at the same time, I was so excited to put out The Vow That Twisted Fate and be like, okay, my book is out there, because it's a totally different feeling to switch from editing to writing. It's just not comparable.
So are you able to edit yourself or not?
That's a great question. I think that my flop books experience after college, back in like 2013, 2014, I tried to put those books out unedited. And I say unedited, I mean, I was the only one that edited them. And I learned that there's such a thing as page blindness, and you fix the errors in your document in your head if you're the one that wrote it way more than you do if you didn't write it. And you miss key plot holes that make sense in your head because you know where it's going. So with Vow That Twisted Fate, I definitely paid for almost all of my lines of edit. I got my developmental edit, and it was so discouraging that I almost quit writing altogether. And thank you, Melanie, for that. She pointed out some big issues that after a couple of years off, my husband was like, you need to fix these. You need to put it out. So last summer, I was like, we're going to do this. I picked it up. I did the revision. I sent it to 2 beta readers and had them do it. And then I started looking for like copy editors and line editors. And it was so expensive, even though they were giving me a good deal. Line edits are like $1,600 for a 100,000 word novel plus usually. And I was working 2 jobs to pay the bills. I was like, I can't do this. So I found AutoCrit, which is a self-publishing software similar to Grammarly, except that I could narrow it down by genre and say, okay, according to fantasy right now, you're using way more adverbs than the average fantasy author. And you can also change it to sci-fi, or you can change it to horror, you can change it to nonfiction. And it was so affordable. It's $30 a month. And in just a few months, I finished my edit, my self-edit, and I sent it back to the same person who'd quoted me the developmental edit for $1,600. She's like, this doesn't even need a line edit anymore. You can completely skip your line edit, and it saved me $1,600. And so I did get it copy edited after I self-edited, And then I got it proofread by a separate person, and then the formatter did their stuff, and then I got it galley proofed by a galley proofer just to make sure there was nothing left. And I was so relieved that when the proofreader sent it back, there were only 13 errors left in it. So that's a really long way of saying I really don't think you can effectively self-edit your work to the level you would like, even as an editor. Editors need editors too.
Absolutely. And I know on Zoom into Books, we have a lot of first-time authors and debut authors who watch. For those who may not be familiar, tell us what a developmental editor does. Please.
Sure. A developmental editor is not looking for typos and grammatical errors like a technical, we call technical editing. We're looking for issues in your plot, like holes. Why did this happen? You skipped this here, or this was not clear to me, or maybe I walked away with a different impression than you meant. We also look for character development. Characters should have an arc. So the character should start in a point. This is their normal. And then they should dip down to a super low, or they get up to a super high, and they sort of ride what we call beats through the story. So there should be, on my case, I follow the hero's journey. There's a lot of different beats you can follow, but it's here's the normal, and then there's the call to action, and then they accept the call, but then they back off of the call, and they're like, wait a minute, I don't think I can do this. And then they're forced into action, and then you have the resolution at the end. And each of those beats should show a growth to the character. So instead of you as the author trying to figure out who all has that and who all doesn't, developmental editors check for that. And then we check world building and make sure that you didn't say magic over here could only be used to bend forks, and then over here you're using magic to clean the dishes. So it's sort of, I think it's the most expensive edit if you're a new author, but it's also the most mentally challenging edit to do. A copy edit's way easier.
That was very informative. I know that I'm sure a lot of authors don't think of dissecting their book into those type of compartments. That was very informative. Thank you. So getting back to the vow that twisted fate, how did you come up with the title?
The title was actually something she says to Maverick. The main character, Arlena, in my dream, looked at Maverick, and she had called him forward in time, and she's like, our vow will twist fate. And it just stuck to me that to this day, that was back in 2016, I remember it just as clear as day. And so I really wanted the title to be The Vow That Twisted Fate. But my husband hated that title. And there's some conventions about titles. You know, your title should convey so much about your book, what a reader is going to expect. And so I went to critique groups, and I was like, what do you think of the title without the cover? What do you think of the title with the cover? And ultimately, I just loved it so much that I decided to keep it, because the whole story, there's two plots. There's her plot finding out who she is, you know, which is one huge twist that I can't say. And then, of course, there's the obvious, her bringing the dwarves forward in time so that they can beat the bad guy and twist the fate of their future that's predestined for them. So it just stuck.
That's an interesting story, and I think a lot of titles come about from, I get manuscripts with no title, and I always tell the authors the title will present itself, and it always does, from the manuscript through proofing, editing, production process. I know long titles always get shortened, usually to 2 words or more, so probably your book is talked about in circles as The Vow, I'm sure. So you have a wide range of characters, as we have talked about. Who is your favorite character in your own book?
That's so hard because they're all like my babies. And since I didn't really base this off of anybody I knew, like some stories, you're like, oh, I want them to have the personality of this person. I didn't really walk in with a preference to one character. I think the most fun to write, though, was probably the villain, Maedra. She is just a villain that makes you wonder what good and evil is, which is the ultimate purpose of the book, is to say that there's good and evil in all of us. If we don't accept that there's evil in us, we can't change to be better. We can't defeat something that we don't want to acknowledge is there. And Maedra is an example of evil of the best intentions. She's the underworld's champion, and she represents all the races that everybody else thought was less than, and they all got banished with her. And so she feels like they deserve to come back, and they deserve to conquer the world that kicked them out and tossed them aside and treated them badly. And in a way, she's right. So it's like really, it was really intriguing writing her. She was my favorite character to write.
I know a lot of actors have said they really enjoy playing the villain part. It's usually a much richer and deeper character sometimes, but writing fantasy, we were talking earlier, and for those who have just joined us, we're talking with Katherine D. Graham. She has a debut novel out called The Vow That Twisted Fate, and it's epic fantasy. This is a very fast-growing genre, and I think that, as we were talking earlier too, the pandemic gave growth to this genre along with many others. So would you like to read a selection for us?
Oh, sure.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. We hadn't talked about this before.
No, that's fine. I've been doing reads. So for people that follow my Instagram, as the book got closer to release, I started live reading chapters out of it just to get used to reading aloud and talking before I had interviews.
Well, good.
But since we were talking about Maedra, I'm actually going to read a snippet from the beginning, which is from Maedra's point of view. The book opens with Maedra's point of view, the villain. Because I'm one of those authors that likes to bring everything full circle. And so the end, it's a standalone book. It's not a series. So the whole book is resolved within itself. In the end, you see the resolution of Maedra, the villain, who we open with in the beginning. But, the Two Queens War. I'd never thought I'd watch all the good things in my world disappear right before my eyes in an instant. Not just my loved ones, my castle or pretty gowns. Not just the woods, the flowers, and the waterfalls. No, even the stars in the sky are vanishing. The hair on my neck and arms stand on end. I can barely keep my feet. Earthquake after earthquake drags on and on. Rubble rains down from above, slamming into buildings and roads. Craters jut up around them. A horrifying crescendo of cars squealing and crashing into the rubble surrounds me. People scramble from their cars, pouring out into the streets despite the danger falling from above, desperate to escape the city. Others plummet into cracks growing in the earth. A cavernous divide overflowing with red-hot lava splits the land on the horizon. It cracks in a perfect circle, trapping my castle on an island in a molten ocean. Skyscrapers topple. As the towers collapse in on themselves, the smoke and ash are suffocating, and the ground is white as though covered with snow. My queen, Vardish, my druid advisor, comes running. Blood sops through his shirt. He collapses, clutching an arrow protruding from his chest. Vardish, I shout, catching him before he hits the floor. Ripping open his shirt, I pry the arrow from his chest. My heart sinks into my stomach. A still red metal brand leaves a charred, oozing rune written in fairy tongue on his chest. Evil, it reads. Ripping the sleeve off my dress, I press the cloth against the wound. My fists are shaking, and my jaw aches from clenching my teeth so hard. Another poor soul branded simply for being different, for being unwanted. It's unforgivable. Maedra, someone calls. Sayre, my sworn, kneels at my side. His long black hair flows down past his waist, loose despite being in battle. His armor is gone, his shirt torn. His own brand from several battles ago glows red. What happened? I ask. Where's your armor? Taking my hand in his long, slender fingers, Sayre pulls me aside. Oriel, an imp medic, scurries over to care for Vardish. With a child who needed it, he says, tugging me to the observatory window. We're out of time, he whispers, glancing back to the others to make sure they don't hear. Valera's troops are going to wipe us off the face of the earth. If you're going to end this, you have to do it now. A bright red ring edges into my eyesight. My head is foggy, floaty. This? Not again. I rub my eyes, trying to focus. Below me, my people are fleeing for the divide, but there's no way across. My imps try to help them, but the humans they would protect only greet them with fear. The White Queen Valera's armies loose volley after volley of brand-bearing arrows into the ranks of my imp allies, downing them wave after wave. You know the world will never accept us as their rulers, Sayre. I turn to him, my hearing fading in and out. Even if we win, you and I will always lose. Our people will never be treated equally. Taking my face in his hands, he leans toward me. His lips are soft on my forehead. He places my hand against the rune on his chest, then pulls me into a hug. If standing for you brands me eternally as evil, he whispers, I will follow you into the darkness. Chains wrap around my wrists, but when I blink, they vanish. I blink again, and Sayre's face is gone, replaced by a pair of ravenous red eyes and a face of horrendous black smoke. It's time, I hear myself say, though the words are not my own. Bring me the White Queen. Sayre's face reappears, and he gives me a brief kiss before bowing and hurrying away. Watching him go is like watching him walk into a dark, ever-stretching tunnel. I feel myself falling, and darkness overtakes me. Darkness with bright red eyes. So that's the opening to The Violet Twisted Fate.
Well, if that doesn't make you want to pick this book up, I don't know what does. I hope everyone listened to that. You can get a copy of this book on Amazon, and I've posted the links to Catherine's website. Your cover is dynamite. It's an absolutely beautiful cover. If you want to hold it up there again and tell us about the cover process, how you found your illustrator and got that cover.
So this is the advanced reader copy. So there's a bar here. So if you get the book, which is hardback and paperback and ebook, it won't have the bar. I found Jesh, who's my designer, several years ago, just as part of my college plot books. The one thing that was fantastic about them was the cover. And I was so impressed with Jesh's work that I immediately went back to him for The Violet Twisted Fate. But one of the positives about working with Jesh is I'm not an artist in any way, shape, or form. And I had no idea what to do. So I told him, here's what my book's about. And I sent him the synopsis. And I told him I had an idea, since it's 2 dimensions, to have like the villain and the main character on the cover sort of split like the 2 dimensions. And ultimately, this is what he sent back. So we've got Maedra, who's the villain here, and then Arlena, who's the main character here. And there are 2 castles in the background, the evil castle and the good castle. And then the pentagram in the sky in the background that shows the pentagram is the portal that opens in her sky. They all fall through the pentagram. So he incorporated all of that into the cover, and I was just, when I saw it, I was blown away. He'd outdone himself.
Well, it's beautiful, and it definitely reflects the content and makes you want to pick it up. I know stats say in a bookstore we have 3 seconds, if your book's spaced out, 3 seconds to grab attention. And if the customer picks it up, and they'll turn it over to the back, and you got 1.5 seconds when they make their decision to purchase. And what's changed now over the years, since our bookstores are dwindling, is now everybody and every cover is competing at thumbnail size on the
Right.
internet. So that's another challenge, and definitely your cover meets that challenge. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to write this book?
From beginning until the last edits and last revisions were done, it was probably just shy of 2 years. And of course, there was a gap in between because I wrote it in 2016 mostly, and National Novel Writing Month in November, and then finished it and finalized it in 2017. But when I got it back from the developmental editor, I was like, nope. So I took 3 years before I picked it back up. But when it was all said and done, it took about 2 years to write and edit it. And I think that's interesting because the books I'm writing now are flowing much quicker. And now that I have my editors and I sort of have my routine, it's like, okay, the book is written, it just goes straight to the editor. Pulling the scab off of the feedback I got from the developmental editor for the first book sort of healed the wounds of detaching who I am as a person from the story and allowing the story to be all that it can be. That we all put part of our soul into what we write, but if you can't detach that to let it, like almost like a child as a parent, if you can't detach and let it take on its own identity, then you're really holding it and yourself back as a writer. So I've had to learn to just accept and embrace and be thankful for criticism and bad reviews. And this book hasn't had anything less than a 3 review yet, crossing fingers, but I seriously read and took to heart all the reviews on my flop books, and instead of taking it as you're an awful person, you're an awful writer, it was here's how I can improve these books. And the biggest chunk was editing. So yeah, it was good.
It's true. Reviews are very helpful, as are critique groups. I know almost every author that we talk to, people do not realize how valuable that input is from people who are not your family, not your good friends. They're just really interested in helping you make your book better. And I know that that it's contributed to your success as well. That's for sure. Now, your book came out in January. So we got through the pandemic, but things were still locked down when your book came out. So I'm sure you haven't had a lot of opportunities to get out with your book. But I ask everybody on Zoom into Books this, tell us what your most memorable book moment has been thus far since your book's been released.
Well, it actually came out in July. It just came out on the 9th.
Well, okay.
But the Amazon, I used Amazon, and this is a tip for those of you who are authors that are watching. I decided to use Amazon for a soft release of my ARC copies, not knowing that it was going to put that as the publication date for the paperback copy. But what I put out was not the final edited version in January. And so I pulled it back down, after all because I have 50% of my audience is international. And it's cheaper for them to get their book from Amazon. So I would gift it to them, put it up on Amazon, did a soft release. I entered their shipping information. I had Amazon ship it to them, way cheaper than the $40, $50 from shipping at USPS. But then the trade-off was, now I've got it in there as a different one. So I might do something different, like release them under a working title or something going forward. I don't know. But it launched again. The actual launch was July 9th. So all the ebook pre-orders came out on July 9th, and the hardbacks shipped out on the 9th and all of that. So it's been a very interesting 2 weeks. I think the most memorable moment that I have had, though, was definitely participating in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards with the book, because it went out to the Next Generation Indie Book Awards at the recommendation of one of my author friends who had also contributed her book. Her name is C.K. Soren. She's the author of Trimarked, and she was like, I just put my book in this competition, and I think that Val, like you said, we shorten the name. She's like, I think that Val deserves to be put in this competition. And I was like, I don't have any chance. These authors are fantastic, and they've been doing it years, and I have read her book, and her book is great, and we're in the same genre. There is no way I'm going to beat her book. And so I was shocked when I got my finalist award in the mail. But attending the award ceremony and seeing that I had placed as one of the 5 fantasy finalists just solidified that I am an author and not just a writer writing for fun anymore. It made the whole thing seem real. And I'm so close to what I think might be the only thing that could top that, which would be hitting bestseller. Right now on Amazon, it is sitting at like 114 in its categories, and the ebook. So I have been pushing all day yesterday and all day today. It's like, please buy the ebook on Amazon because it's 99 cents, and I'm giving 100% of my profits today to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. But also because I'd really love to hit bestseller, which is not something I ever thought would be in the cards for me, to be perfectly honest.
That's terrific. And the Indie Book Awards is a very tough competition. And it is it is a source of pride for everybody who wins an award. Our very first book award was an Indie Book Award, and that was quite a few years ago. And they are definitely a first-class operation. But the Amazon 100 bestseller list, for those of you who are watching, and 99 cents is a good price. So you said that your target market generally, or your sales mostly, are overseas?
Yeah, about half of my sales are in the UK and Australia, and a smattering of other places. Right beside the US on my Amazon list is the UK, pretty much equal 50-50. And that's been something that I embraced early on. I felt like there was a gap just from what I was observing in American authors that are indies that take on the expense and the hassle of also doing overseas. And I was like, if I'm going to stand out in the fantasy genre, because it's so big and there's so many talented authors, many of whom I love and read, I've got to offer something that maybe isn't as widely offered. And so for that reason, I've branched out overseas, and also with the Spanish speaking community. So I've had The Vow That Twisted Fate translated into Spanish, and it should be coming out next month in Spanish for my Spanish speaking readers. As a bilingual Japanese English speaker, it just is nice to be able to read something in your own language,
That's another thing that Amazon Kindle and Nook and other e-reading resources has afforded us over the past few years. With technology, the world became very small. When we can reach a global audience, we do that with our ebooks and audiobooks. So you can forego shipping.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that. So you have other books you are working on. Would you like to talk about some of those?
Sure. So I've got a series of novellas called the Splitting Worlds Novellas, and I decided to put those out while I was building my audience, and I was going to be one book, and it's the one that everybody gets free when they sign up for my email list. Well, then the readers started telling me that they loved the Tengu warrior princess from there, and they wanted to know her story. So I wrote her a novella, and that came out in June, Down Falls the Queen. Just short, 70 pages. And then people were like, well, now I want to know more about this world. So now I've got one called Downfalls the King for December. So that's sort of my side series every 6 months or so. I hope to put out just the little 60, 70 page novellas. But I'm also working on a full novel that will be the first in a duology called Starfire Express. This one's sort of like a Hunger Games meets the 10th Kingdom. A human girl gets on the wrong train on accident and doesn't realize till she sits down that she's the only human on the whole train. And there's all these fairy tale creatures that you've ever imagined. And the chief of the not so secret police, the wolf, has finally apprehended the notorious godmother, as in the fairy godmother, who to them is evil because she showed off magic to everybody and put the magic community at risk. So he's arrested her. The train is transporting her prison car back to the central city with the dragon overlords. And this human girl is stuck, swept up in the middle of everything. So that's the one I'm writing for next spring.
Okay, that's very enticing. And I know your fans are going to be anxious to get their hands on that. That's terrific. We always have a lot of first-time authors, debut authors watching Zoom into books. What writing tips, writing advice would you share with people who are about to embark on a journey that you have just taken?
Oh, I would say find a mentor. My mentor, Lindsay, with Of Ink and Pearls Publishing, she was phenomenal. I went from a scared author who didn't know what I was doing for my own books to the point where I almost went with a very expensive vanity type press is what they call them, but it's an expensive self-publishing press to the tune of like $8,000, which I didn't do. But I went through the Alliance of Independent Authors, which I used to vet all my editors and sources, and how I found the Indie Book Awards actually. And I found Lindsay listed on there as an editor and a mentor. And so I talked to her, and she has walked me through so much step by step. It's so invaluable to have another person come alongside you. So I would say find yourself a mentor and be teachable. Again, learn to detach a little bit from the book and be teachable, because as long as you're teachable and you're flexible and you're willing to learn, you can go far. And you just have to remember to be kind to yourself. We're very quick to show kindness to other indie authors once you get in the community, but you should show yourself the same kindness that you would show to them.
That's the best advice I've ever heard. That's terrific. It's true. And I would also urge new authors, once you get with a publisher, to, as Katherine said, take their advice. I know we get comments like, well, all my friends like this cover, but the publisher wants this cover. You need to do what the publisher wants to do because they've been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard to give that up. It's like letting your child go out into the world and just say, well, I'll see you sometime. So
Right.
that's very grounded, good advice. So you are still editing for a living, correct?
Yes, I actually, for the last 6 months during the transition, I've been editing, and then I've also been working part-time at my customer service day job, because I was like, what if I'm not a good fit for editing full-time? And so my boss at Autocrit was so happy to hear that I have given my notice. So actually today is my last day at my day job, and I'm going to miss everybody there, and I love them, but now I'm going to be just a full-time editor and part-time writer, I guess. I mean, it's always full-time writer, but
It is. And you are also an award-winning author. And I always tell my authors, put it on your byline, put it on your email address. You are, and it's a big deal. There's no such thing as a bad award.
that's right. Yes.
If a librarian, teacher, parent has a choice between a book to buy a book that has an award and one that doesn't, 99% of the time they'll pick the one with the award.
That's right.
So, and it also gets more outreach for your book through the award competition.
Yes.
So that's very good. So tell people, we're just about out of time. One more time, how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. So I have The Vow That Twisted Fate up on Amazon, of course, and Barnes & Noble and Google Play. But Amazon's where we're trying to break through the top 100 today. But I have a website, which is www.katherineDgraham.com. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, Reedsy Discovery, BookBub, Facebook. Some of them for editing, some of them for writing, but all of them ultimately are under Katherine D. Graham. So you can find that pretty easily.
People can get in touch with you for speaking engagements, school visits, book club visits. I know now the pandemic has taught most of the population how to use Zoom and FaceTime and a lot of other ways to reach into classrooms, homeschool groups.
Right.
So if you can't travel, you can do it virtually. And I would highly recommend you put Katherine Graham at the top of your list. She's got more knowledge than most people I've ever talked to.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure having you here, Katherine, and I want to thank everyone for joining us live on Facebook.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. This video, if you missed the first of it, will be on the Zoom Into Books Facebook page. You can watch it anytime. And in the coming weeks, it'll be on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. And we do package the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel for classrooms, libraries, book clubs. So it's a wealth of information for your group. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.